we can try to come closer to each other, driven by our own curiosity to learn more about design. And that's why held this session. I think it's at the end of the day today. It sort of converges all the thoughts which we have gone through today, all the practices we have discussed about today. So thereby, most of our discussion is going to be around the meta subject of design, around the philosophy of design, around the culture of design. Uh, and I've got two very, very interesting gentlemen with me. They look partially very similar, but they are very different in their own approach because,
That's
and
right.
yeah, and they are from two different parts, almost diagrammatically two different parts of the globe. Uh, Tim is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Tirthankar Dash, I call him Dash. So Dash is from Singapore, and I got them both together because I thought they were wonderful. In terms of the seamless identities, yet differential opinions they both have. And gentlemen, a very warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Vishal.
Thank you.
So let me just directly dig in. Tim and Dash, for the audience, who are you? What's your identity?
What a big question.
So Tim, maybe you can start and then Dash can follow up.
Sure thing. So my name is Tim Fife. I am calling in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's an honor to be here, and a big thank you to the Internet Mobile Association of India for having us here. I am a designer, innovator, and strategist. I've been working in the field for about 20 years. Formerly a principal director of innovation and thought leadership at Accenture Strategy in Australia, and a senior director at Second Road, which is a strategic innovation firm based out of Sydney, Australia. I've been working at the intersection of design and strategy for 20 years, primarily focusing on how to apply design to large-scale wicked problems. Anything from organizational strategy to reinventing new businesses, reconceiving city life, and reimagining industries. Essentially, the approach I take is to work with the idea that anything can be seen as an object of design or the material of design, whether it's tangible or intangible, but remembering always that our primary goal as designers is to craft ways to improve the human experience across the board.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dash?
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm not a designer, so let me start with that. So I enjoy being amongst designers. I think of myself more as a sort of a design philosopher, just to try and fit in there somehow. Just to sort of say, here's the guy who asks the questions before you even start designing anything. So before you design a thing, I'm the guy who goes in there and looks at, so what is a car? And so I ask these weird questions and start looking at data patterns across. Essentially, what I do is a bit of pattern mapping. I ask those questions. What is the meaning of all of these things? So I'm hired to ask those questions. And we look at some frameworks from there. So we look at data patterns. We look at frameworks. I kind of work within that data and pattern mapping thing. Now, these kind of frameworks inform design. And as Tim said, as the world gets more wicked, it gets more interesting, those patterns and those frameworks. So I'm the guy who kind of looks at this idea of pattern mapping. And so, maybe a bit of philosophy, maybe a bit of data mining. That's what I do.
In fact, that's where me and Dash have often connected in the past, where we start with the conventional subject of design, and then we meander into something which is completely in the realms of spirituality. We talk about the design of self, something which Dash is going to elaborate today. Thank you guys for coming here. So let's start it. Okay. What I'm sure all of us keep on thinking as designers. While we keep on practicing design, while we keep on doing design strategy, the back of my mind always questions this fact that what is design, right? It's almost like questioning life. Right? Why is life? What is life? And somehow almost the same amount of relevance or importance happens to design, right? So I'm still keen to know, and I want to know opinions from both of you. What is the current notion of design, right? What is design, according to you? I mean, it's everywhere, right? You can see it everywhere, and yet we misunderstand design, and yet people ask me, "What do you design?" and I have to go into a 10-minute long conversation. So I want to know your opinions.
What a huge question. I mean, design can be it can be seen from so many perspectives, right? I think from an outsider's point of view, design is a collection of of skills or industries. There's industrial design, there's user interface design, there's graphic design. But I think it's more effective to look at design from a broader place, to sort of zoom way out from that. One of my mentors has always talked about design as being an architectonic art. That design is the foundation upon which much of life is built, and it's also part of the kind of inherent human condition that we are all designers, in that design can be thought of as putting thought into the thing we want to make in the world. Aristotle defined design as simply forethought. So the idea of it just being this thing that we do whenever we are considering a direction to take in our life, and then how do we go about making the decisions towards that direction, as opposed to simply falling into the next thing.
So Tim, do you take a specific aspect of design and you sort of follow it, or are you open-ended about the notion of design and you keep on adjusting and iterating it in your life?
I think that we have to, as practitioners, continually be taking it and modifying. But I do hold a core, the way I approach design, in terms of a very broad definition of interaction design, that anything we make in the world is fundamentally an interaction between two people, oftentimes mediated by something. So whatever it is we're making is simply an attempt to, as one human being, affect the experiences of another human being.
Sure. Dash?
Yeah, Vishal, it's a very interesting question. It's a very conceptual question, and I've always grappled with this idea of what is design. And the most philosophical answer to that is, we've always designed. From the time I think we've got minds working. Human beings have drawn mandalas and sketches and all of that all along. I think it's a navigation of chaos and order. Design is that which moves the chaotic to the orderly. That's a more philosophical answer. It's like anything that creates order, whether it's in inner cells, whether it's life, outside, cities, the world. The idea of the ordering process is the process of design. And because order creates stability. And so anything that is stabilized around the idea is called, that's a conceptual answer. But a more broader answer is, as Tim says, there's an architectural idea of design, which is the external design. So, the manifestations which are more external. And then there is the behavioral side of design, which is more internal. That which you experience as form, there's there's function, there's experience, but form and function are fine. But the moment you move into experience, it becomes slightly internal design, which is how are you? So when you say, I live in a smart home, you say smart is the internal part of it. There is an internal to the smart. So what is smart for you could be very different. Smart for me, it will be smart for America, smart for whatever. Or if you say, I live in my chair is comfortable, you're saying there is an internal part. So comfortable is the subjective internal side of design. So I think of design through these two frames constantly: the architectural idea, the external design, and the behavioral side of design. And they need to be talking to each other to sort of understand, because behavior is design. In some ways, it only manifests in behavior. Either the object is behaving in a particular way, or a human being is. And to that extent, it says that interaction in that space. So for me, the internal and the external working together is really the intersection of good design. And it's great that we've started acknowledging some of these nuances in the field of design.
So thereby, sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
I'm just so glad to just that you say that, Dash, that idea of recognizing that internal and external split. I think that far too often design is cast in its kind of historical and traditional view of being like a world of aesthetics, and just like being stylists, and an idea of it's purely about that external. But if the external isn't put towards the purpose, which is affecting the internal world, like how does any design make people feel, behave, kind of perceive the world? Delight is an internal motive, is an internal position, and design should be moving towards creating delight for people.
Right. And thereby,
not just
I think,
looking cool.
Yeah, even if I extend this thought to, like, one of the participants today in the day asked, very specific question about design thinking being not recognized in certain organizations and being recognized in certain organizations. My answer to that, and that's because it's linked to the subject, since the feeling and the external aspects of it are very, very subjective, very contextual, very individual, thereby it would be very difficult to define the practice of design or the thinking in a very specific way. Because if you have a specific, then you say, okay, this is happening in my company, or this is not happening in my company. But design in its relevance is actually happening in every organization. It just needs to
Yeah.
bloom out, right? So I feel even the companies which think that they don't do design actually have design somewhere deep down in their practice. What are your views about
I think we're constantly designing because we are always trying to create that sense of balance and order in our lives. I think, but what has happened is, I think the consciousness makes all the difference. Are you
it?
aware? Are you building the right frameworks for you to be? I mean, so when you say and to be aware and look at technology today. I mean, we have started using. What has happened is technology moves backwards. So I've invented an algorithm that creates a thing. Now designers to come in and say, how do I make sense of it?
True.
So making sense of things is and everyone is trying to make sense of it. It's just that we need to come together to discuss the implications of that. So I think that sense making process is happening all the time. It's just that sometimes we feel breathless in the context of we forget that we're designing. And design actually is moving to two directions, as Tim said. One is build, and the other is solve. It's. I mean, I think of design as a beautiful because first is design has become a process. It's a verb. It is. I mean, design has become a verb, and problems are now design questions.
Sure.
Problems
Sure.
are now design questions, in which case you can't just think of build. Even the build mindset has to morph into the solve mindset.
True.
And
True. True.
everyone is trying to solve. This is where strategy and innovation and design and research, they all are talking to each other because we are moving into a lovely space where we are all trying to make sense of it together.
Yeah.
So Dash, yeah.
I was just saying, I would add to that there's also design is also it's dispositional. It's a way of being, and I think that design thinking, particularly, one of the real values of it is that it sits as a counterpoint to what might be thought of as like traditional business thinking, where in organizations we have a in business school, we're taught to have this focus on control and efficiency and certainty, and design sits as a counterpoint to that, to really embrace the ideas of play and collaboration and experimentation, and like above all else, this idea of having comfort with ambiguity. And I think that's regardless of the processes, that idea of saying, I am uncertain of the current circumstances is a necessary place to be often in business. And that's what design thinking is particularly well focused for.
Sure.
And this act of designing, it's what in the idea of continuous innovation, what you're doing is continuous design in this particular case, because you are constantly trying to move to the next table, the next table, the next table, whatever that is. Sure. And it's very interesting that design is now they're part and parcel of every journey that we take.
So taking this notion or this thought, I would like each of you to give me one example, or to the audience one example where you practically applied, Tim, in your case, the externalization of the application of design. Maybe a quick, we don't have time, but a quick case study of where you did, a couple of lines on that. And Dash, since I know you, your own evolution of self, if you can just spend a few lines on that, it would be great for the audience to know how design is applied in a varied, scape.
All right. I'll start with the externalizations, and then we can get to the mysteries of the internal.
Yes.
A client that I worked with a couple of years ago in Australia was an energy company, and they were looking at what are the big moves that are happening in their industry. And again, thinking about how design can apply at larger and larger systems, we were looking at what happens when you effectively try to design an industry. So we were helping them to understand, where is the industry moving to? What are the big potential structural changes of society around us, and how do we design our way into that? How do we kind of take advantage of the fact of what's happening out there in the world? So in this case, we were looking at what happens with the wild weather phenomenons that are happening with global climate change. What's happening with the explosion of microgrid networks and personal energy, like individual energy production. The idea of increased connectivity, of increased virtual life. And we examined first, what does the industry currently provide for? What is the business? What is the business? What's the market need the business is currently trying to address? then we imagined what happens in the world when these external structural changes become even bigger. What happens when weather is completely kind of throwing infrastructural systems into chaos? What happens when everybody has 3D manufacturing capabilities in their home? What does that mean for the power systems around us? And then we worked our way backwards from there to say, how might we as an organization need to rethink the offers we put to market, the places that we invest as an organization, the services we provide. So we were able to create these new, in some cases, new business opportunities, in some cases, new service opportunities, in some cases, entire kind of industry spinoffs that the organization could begin to invest in, based entirely on trying to understand what are the externalities that are current, the externalities that are coming, and how we might kind of work in regards to that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It's almost like a scenario planning, right? Which we
Yeah, but like taking that and then really adding in senses of storytelling and imagination and invention, and pluralities, the idea of what happens when these things intersect, not just the standard kind of shell 2x2, but what happens when we're looking at arrays of structural changes.
Sure. Great. Dash, you think the scenario planning can happen on the self?
Of course. I mean, scenario planning is always happening. We're always projecting ourselves into these interesting ideas, and we always live our aspirational self, by the way. We hardly ever live our real self in some ways. And design should always acknowledge that we are always designing for the aspirational self and never the real self. Well, I'm going to give you two interesting examples. One is the build example and the solve example, because both are very interesting, and I would keep them separate. The build example is that a client came to us saying, we want to build smart homes, and this whole thing about smartness and all of that. And so we put gadgets out there, and buttons that will switch on, and all of these things would happen in your house. And the client thought, the guys who were building the systems, they thought, oh, they've cracked it, because everything is going to fit in perfectly. People will become amazed by this magical power of technology. And then when we walked in there, it was absolutely thrown out by people. They said, we don't want this in our homes. And we were like, why would you not want it? They said, what, in the face of this, I feel disabled. My mindset is that if I walk around with all these gadgets, then I feel that I don't have hands and legs.
True.
I feel that I'm the slave and they are the masters, and I have no control over my own home. So no one thought about it that way. No one thought, it's just that if you switch on the buttons, and they feel that I feel that I'm going to grow older faster because of technology, because now I can't do these things with my hand. And so one of the thoughts that came up was the technology must be designed as our exoskeleton, not as our masters. It must extend my hand and to build it, extend my legs. And so if we don't position it that way, technology can be overwhelming. So what was called smart was actually rejected, and we had to dumb it down, to meet the internal self of the human. So there's a loss of dignity, there's a loss of confidence in the face of technology. And now that's an internal example of how you need to build things within the boundaries of human consciousness. And before you jump into saying, I've solved the world's problems, which is why Google Glass didn't work as an idea, and a lot of other reasons, because you must understand, when behavior collides with design, a lot of things change. True. And same with, another solved problem, we do a lot of work in behavior change. People were not using specific behaviors for mosquito management. There's a lot of malaria and dengue deaths in our part of the world, and people wouldn't use it because, and all these experts would go in there and they would say, why are people not using these little gadgets like, the larvicides and stuff? And we realized that, people never thought about, experts in that field didn't think about, and we just discovered this insight that every time you look at those objects, you think of death. Because you don't want to be thinking of mosquitoes just take them out, because it's a death instinct, right? You do not want to think about death at all. So people normalize it, even in people's homes where there have been deaths because of mosquitoes, malaria, even they switch off. So we had to reframe, we had to give a mental model. We say, no, this is playful stuff. We change the colors we change, the idea of it to say, no, it's not about death. It's not about protection. It's about fun and play. And so that's in that way we were able to move them from one kind of a mindset to the other. So design must embrace its internal mechanisms of behavior and mindsets to be able to design well.
True.
It might go without saying, but I just wanted to reinforce what Dash was saying there, how important it is in design to make sure that the conceptual actually meets the experience. And the idea of
Absolutely.
ethnocentric research and going out and testing these ideas out before we make too big of investments in them. Because smart homes sound fantastic. Homes which actively disable the users sound terrible. And we don't realize they're the same thing.
Exactly.
In the minds of some,
Which is why a lot of ideas fail, Tim, because we don't look at the internal, how is this received by the subject? It's an design creates experience as a subject and object interacting. We look at the object and we forget the subject. The subjective aspect of it becomes very, very important.
Absolutely.
Also, I think from a very philosophical point of view, all these externalities, when you give it a solution, you tend to take it like today you've taken a car, the first day you're happy, the second day you're okay, third day you're bored, right? And anything which external comes into our system possibly has a shorter life, unless until we internalize that and make it as a part of me, right? And that's where this alignment of self to the external is very important when we look at good design.
They create meaning in our lives because they create meaning because you don't have to then see it as an external idea. The moment it becomes meaningful, it becomes also me in that sense.
We can talk on this for hours, I know that, but I just took off the word system from your discussion, and I think according to the system philosophy, problems can be solved and systems can be understood better in the context of relationships rather than in isolation, right? So a lot of times when we think about system design, we think about these 5 products which are put together like a hardware, software, and being given to the person. But in that system, we somehow forget the most important part, which is the inner self, right? Because we are a part of the system, we are not away from it. What are your views about the system design, especially when it comes to strategy and innovation? And where do you see, this sort of playing in the dimensions of economic, social, or any kind of human space? What do you both think? Dash or Tim, anybody can pitch in.
Tim, why don't you?
Tim,
okay.
please.
Right. So, I mean, I think that it's one of the first big conceptual moves designers need to do is to get out of the space of particularly individual and into the space of the systemic. Whether we're talking about the object or interaction of design or the individual. And remember that both there's an internal and external and a systemic and an individual. And what we want to be doing is thinking about how those intersect across the board. So when designing strategies, thinking about our internal individual experiences, whether they be employee experiences or frontline experiences or manufacturing experiences, but also think about the internal systems and how does the systemic experience affect the individual experience. And then we do the same thing externally. What is the individual customer or user or recipient experience, but also what are the external systems that need to be considered? And this is like the power company example I was talking about earlier, really understanding what those external systems are and how those affect the external experiences. What are the internal systems and how does it affect the internal experiences? So if we're not thinking about systems, we're only going to ever think about individual touch points. We're only going to think about kind of the nodes and not the network. And and we have the full capability to design the network, but we have to be thinking at that level. And that's a huge shift for some designers to make. And what's exciting though is strategists or technologists that might always be thinking up there can also shift down to think about the human experience. And it's that interaction between the designer and the strategist, the kind of where the systems thinking starts to overlap with the experiential thinking. That I think sort of the real potential for design is something that can create breakthrough really exists.
Do you think in this relationship it becomes like a chicken and egg story between the designers and the rest?
In a sense, I think of it more as hopefully like a self-feeding system. It becomes a virtual. I mean, what's the term for it? The opposite of a death spiral. A virtuous cycle.
Right.
Where it starts to build off of itself. But it's got to be something where we are continuously contributing to the thinking rather than trying to kind of declare ourselves as being like the top of the pile. I think that's the other big the other kind of big challenge to work against are the organizational and social pressures to be like the one who made the choice or the lead thinker, rather than being part of a collaborative that's helping to move things forward.
And correct me if I'm a little biased towards design, since we are from design. Do you think designers have a better capability or ability to solve this, if I have to agree to this chicken and egg theory, to actually undergo, become the connector, become the collaborator, because behaviorally, we are in a way more open-ended than the management side or the business side?
I would say not. Yes, and what I would add to that is it's also the idea of being the facilitator and being the coach. So oftentimes, as a designer, there are times when I enter a situation as an empty vessel. I might have a sense of process, but I don't have a sense of content. And process can only take you so far, and content can only take you so far. But when you bring these together, that's where that's the necessary ingredients to move forward. So as an effective innovator or designer, to be able to take a collective of people who may not be familiar with the process, may not have the comfort of ambiguity that a designer might have, and being able to shepherd them through that process, but take full advantage of all of the expertise and all of the experience and all of the perspectives that collective has. So I think if designers begin to think of themselves as co-designers, and the idea of co-design being this collaborative movement forward, where not everyone needs to be, wearing the cloak of design, but there should be somebody who is effectively helping to bring that group forward, and need not be the leader. You can coach from the middle or coach from the back.
Sure. Great. Dash?
Yeah, I think designs, one is when you move into the systems design phase, one is the complexity of it. And you need to start understanding it through not just the mathematical models of connecting it, but the sort of the consciousness part of it, which is where culture comes in. Every system has a culture. I mean, whether you think of it as a city or a nation or even a home, and then you need to take some of these cultures into account. Look at the idea of IKEA coming into India and setting up Indian homes. It must take into account the designers must take into account the idea of Indian living systems.
Right.
So you can't just say, here's efficiency for you. We worked with Steelcase, which was trying to launch office furniture, but the way they work in India, it's so different from the way people work in America. So if you don't understand culture, coffee didn't exist in India. Coffee as a culture didn't exist in India. So when coffee was brought in, by Cafe Coffee Days of the world, it created a notion of a system. So coffee became a system which represented its own meaning. Same with chocolates. Cadbury's brought in chocolates culture into India. So when I impress upon designers and strategists that when you look at systems, also start looking at the culture of the system when you're building it, because the system behaves as a collective very differently from its individual entities. And then the culture also has meaning in it, right? So what does safety mean? What does efficiency mean? What does beauty mean? You need to start designing some of these intangibles into the process of systems thinking as we build it. It should not be a mechanized or a mechanistic model of systems thinking. And I can go on talking about examples. McDonald's came and failed. It had to redesign essentially into this part of the world. So as we look at systems, we must take into account the cultural models of systems thinking as well.
Kellogg's, for example, right?
Kellogg's, yeah. I mean, we've helped Pepsi launch, oats which had to be morphed into pohas, and so that meets the culture of. So we've been instrumental, and that's what we try and bring to the conversation from Quantum. We say, let's understand the unstated, the unknowns, which are implicit to the culture, and how they interface with oats or with breakfast. The idea of breakfast in India is so different, is that you can't today tell me to have cornflakes in the morning with milk if I've not grown up with that idea.
And I love the idea that we can think about culture as being designable. That culture isn't just this thing that emerges, although it is very much has emergent qualities to it. There's a theory in design of the 4 orders of design, where the first order of design is graphic design, second order is industrial or object design, third order is service and interaction design, and fourth order is systems design, which includes cultures and societies. And the idea of legislative bodies are essentially fourth order designers. Legislators design the laws that create the impression within society of what is right and wrong and what is good and bad. And culture is nothing else if not a shared agreement of what is acceptable and what is impermissible. And all of that's designable.
True. So at the base, design is about action, right? Design is about looking into changing the status quo of what you have to what you would have or what you would desire to have, right? All of us have read Herbert Simon, his view about everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations to a preferred one. We always look for a preferred one rather than the existing situation, and that's a human instinct, right? Uh, and we know that current COVID situation has possibly pushed us more to have a more preferred situation in future, right? But we also have seen an onslaught of technology right now. Uh, our meeting is on technology platform. My child's meeting in the school happens completely on technology platform, right? And this is possibly going to be some aspect of it is going to be a one-way, push, and it's going to stay with us for some time. Now, with technology being almost opened through our doors, into our houses, into our minds, where do you see the relevance of design and designers, both in present and in future? What do you see the role of design as in the technology space? Tim?
Um, another. You have very good questions, Vishal. Very good questions.
I know. It's like you have to think about it for 2 minutes before. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that in one sense, it continues to open the field to design. That this idea of as the world is changing, and as these in these cases, these kind of technology platforms are becoming, in some senses, both more necessary and required, and also more ubiquitous. How do they start to show up in our lives? I think the thing we also need to really keep in mind is a term that Dash brought up earlier, which is the idea of human dignity. And how do we ensure that the systems that we bring to bear to these changes in the world around us continue to support the dignity of all of those involved? And perhaps even more importantly, how do we begin to conceive of systems that are inclusive to those who previously haven't been involved? Certainly in America, one of the things that we're becoming very, very aware of are the unconscious systems of oppression that have been built into all of our systems. And how do we as designers, when we have these big changes around us like COVID, how do we effectively design to both support people in that new reality while not continuing to support systems of oppression that have already been there? Because part of the problem we're in right now is because we are living out the consequences of those systems of oppression. So as designers, we need to really keep in mind this idea of dismantling oppression and continuously reinforcing human dignity. And I think that those kind of as design principles need to be kept in mind as we're moving into these spaces where technology is going to become something that, you know, we're already all relying on, and will only more so, at least in the current situation.
True. Great. Dash?
I think it's a crazy question, actually, because technology has existed before we existed, actually. I mean, so this is not a conversation about today. It has been, it precedes design as an idea. The moment we created fire, the moment we, the hammer came in, we've started interacting with technology. Every era has asked this question, by the way, so it's not a new question. Every era has asked this question. When the horses went out and the motor vehicles came in with hydraulic systems, and so it's just that we are an inflection point. We must understand design is what does design happen in inflection points. So there was one inflection point when power, we got electricity and power. So that was an inflection point, and then it moved. Now we're hitting another inflection point where we are moving into an era where where there's such a thing as digitization or robotics or these things come in. So we must understand the forces of play between, and I see design and humans as dynamic forces interacting. I mean, they're not static. Oh, I must protect humanism, and so human-centered design is all about making it's not actually. We must understand its journey in its totality, and the humans are changing in interaction with technology, and we must understand both. We must understand what's happening to us. I mean, when we start. So when my best definition is philosopher McLuhan's definition of technology is like technology is our exoskeleton. Phones are extensions of a hand. Cars are extensions of our legs. Roads are extensions of our body. So the hardware is an extension of the body, and the software is an extension of the mind. So we are actually, as humans, expanding our own capacity. We are becoming more human. In that sense, we don't have to protect humans. We must understand the evolutionary idea of humans and embrace that. We don't have to be, or the notebook should look like a notebook because that's some, the skeuomorphic idea of, this must feel like that. And I think we are moving into a world where we need to start understanding what does a moving human look like? What does this moving human concept in a scale of one and to the scale of society? And if we are understanding it that way, we will actually become childs of play. We will understand how to design. So like one simple example is that we don't need to design for efficiency, because AI is going to make it, and robotics will make things very efficient. It will, so we don't have to, because when motor vehicles came in, we had to make things efficient because we had control power and exhaustion, but we don't need to now, in which case we may need to design for joy, we may need to design for inefficiency, let's say. So let's create more fun and meaning. So maybe we need to bring, in the face of disenchantment, we need to create enchantment. Maybe we may design might need to create surprise. So if you see human society evolving into that, and we don't have to protect. It's like human-centered design, and sometimes some of these conversations, how do you save humanity? This empathy is no. You must actually understand in its journey into becoming what it's becoming. I want to participate through the laptops, through this. If online classes are the ones, then how do I make it more interesting then, without resisting it? If conferences are going to become this, and how do we make that more interesting, rather than saying, oh, we should. I think we need to journey along, and we are at cave stages of it. As chairs grow, brains, everything is be augmented. Everything's going to be augmented. And what is augmentation but a layer of intelligence and efficiency on top of things? So between robotics and AI, what you would have is extended arms and legs. In which case, we need to work with those forces. And this journey is going to be very, very interesting.
And I love what Dash was saying there about the skeuomorphic idea of let's just take the thing we've seen in the past and create the technological equivalent of it. We have to eschew those past things we've seen and start looking for the new, the novel. I think one of the ways to think about it is mechanics I always think of mechanics as being the extension of the body. Technology is the extension of the will. What do we want to do in the world? And we have to get away from the real possibilities when we get away from the idea of what we have seen before and start, really moving into the space of imagining things we've never seen.
I think the more we talk, the more we want to talk, right? So, but unfortunately, we've got our own logistics. I just want to end this with probably a single liner from each one of you, for both of you. I say each one as if there are lots of people, from both of you, about what is your wish in design and what are your actions for it. Just one line. I know it's difficult. It's almost like a Q&A, then we would take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, let me go first. I think 300 years back, the coffee houses came in, and they changed the way we looked at innovation. I think that was the beginning of this era of innovation about 300 years back, because people stopped drinking in pubs, and they started meeting each other out, and then started having coffee and having conversations. What it did was it broke silos. A philosopher would have a coffee with a poet who would have a conversation with scientists. And we need to bring those coffee houses back again. I think design has got siloed into, I'm a graphic designer, I'm a this designer, I'm a researcher, I'm a UX researcher. I think we've created our silos, and we now create our own identities in the silos. We need to create those coffee houses where all of us talk to each other, and because the solving of these complexities of the world requires for a lot of interactive. Design happens in the interaction of these things, not in the silos. Design happens in the interplay of these things. So I would like to see the coffee houses show up again, where we all sit and talk to each other.
Tim?
There's nothing I would love more than finding both of you in a coffee house somewhere. I think that my wish would be, as design is embraced as and a disposition that we all have for us to remember that in every role that we have. My wish would be that every designer, every technologist, every legislator, every city planner, that everyone who employs design on a daily basis always and continuously asks themselves, how is the work that they are doing contributing to the expansion of human dignity? And once dignity is achieved, the expansion of human joy.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we've got a question before. I think we're almost now hitting time, but we've got one question to take. In your view, what is the best balance between design thinking and business thinking / management for corporates to adapt? Tim?
The best. What a difficult, it's contextual. It depends. Yes. I think that it is important for organizations, and I've always said this in my strategy consulting work, is for corporations and organizations to recognize there is a difference between what is required in the moment in regards to running a business and innovating a business. That remember that fundamentally, innovation is about change. Innovation is the introduction of the new. And if an organization is continuously introducing the new, it can never truly expand on what it's done in the past. So a business has to be able to focus on sustainability of what it's done in the past and innovate what it's going to be doing in the future. It changes across what level in the organization you're working at, but typically I like to think of it as sort of like really about 15% of your time should be focused on getting some, 85% of it focusing on making sure the business you're running is sustainable if you want to be able to continuously bring things into the future. Now that's for large established organizations. Smaller organizations, the numbers start to shift, but it's this idea of they're kind of two different skills. They can apply, like they can be focused on each other, but kind of keeping in mind that the thing, you got to be able to keep the lights on before you can make the new thing. Or if you're working out of your garage, make sure your rent is paid, you know?
Right, great. Dash, we can sneak in a comment.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, I actually want to build on that thing that designing for stability and designing for disruptions. We need to keep both in mind as organizations grow. And as Tim said, we need to design, and a toothpick hasn't changed. The design of a toothpick hasn't changed in decades. A container doesn't have to be redesigned. A container has been, if you look at a shipping container, it's one of the most amazing designs, which stayed stable for a very long time. So that design, I mean, organizations that think as containers, and also as the one that is being disrupted. And so, and Tim's logic is absolutely valid. So we need to create organizations must keep these two paths, and they should be talking to each other.
Great. As I said, I would have loved to talk to you guys, till the cows come home. But we have a few more minutes. I think we have a minute, but then we would not justify. We would not be justifying the questions. So I think it's been great for both of you to be here. It's always wonderful to talk to both Dash and Tim, and I would love to stay in touch. I would love to stay in touch, and any future endeavor, we would be hopefully doing it a lot more together.
Thank you
very much. It's a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And now I would transfer it to my host.
Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. Thank you so much. Thank you all the speakers for this amazing session. I would also like to thank all our partners, supporters, and a special thanks to our audience to joining us today. We also have some interesting sessions lined up for tomorrow, so I would request all of you to join us tomorrow as well. Thank you. We are signing off.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.